A, she was a hooah. B, she was a hooah.
When we were first introduced to the character of Richie Aprile, we knew right away that he was going to be trouble. And when we were introduced to Ralph Cifaretto, we sort of got the exact same treatment, as we certainly knew that he is going to be trouble for Tony, and that his tenure on The Sopranos can only end in one way, and that is death. This is the impending downfall of Ralph Cifaretto. When it comes to Ralph Cifaretto, he of course is one of the members that we see throughout The Sopranos that is not well liked amongst his peers. And this is for obvious reasons. Ralph is a part of the DeMeo crime family and starts out as a soldier, but is eventually promoted to captain after the sudden death of Gigi Sestone. We don't discover until later in the series that Ralph is actually a childhood friend of Tony's, as he grew up around Tony, Silvio, and Jackie Aprile Sr., as he states this in the Tale of Storytelling to Jackie Aprile Jr., about the infamous heist Tony pulled off on Feech La Manna. The reason why we don't see or hear from Ralph until the third season is because he is sent down to Miami to keep an eye on things that is happening down south. While he should have been on the job and making sure things are going well for Tony, he instead dabbled into large amounts of cocaine that would later turn into an addiction that he would later use as an excuse for his violent outbursts that caused Tony and everyone an immense amount of stress. However, when he returned home as an order from Tony, we saw just how stressful maintaining an individual like Ralph could be, as he wanted to become a captain as soon as he arrived back in New Jersey. Tony viewed Ralph the same way he viewed Richie Aprile: obnoxious, annoying, disrespectful, arrogant, and just a real pain for Tony's health. As Tony passed over Ralph for the promotion of being a captain in favor of Gigi for these reasons. And it was also during this time that Ralph was weirdly obsessed with the film Gladiator that starred Russell Crowe. To Tony and many of the guys, these random outbursts of quoting lines and acting like a Roman soldier became very annoying. And we even saw just how far Ralph would proceed to go with his almost role-playing like attitude when he struck Georgie in the eye with a metal chain. But as we would later come to see as the series went on, this was only the beginning of Ralph being a real pain for Tony. While Ralph was surely an individual who caused a lot of stress towards Tony, behind all of this, he was actually a tremendous earner for Tony and the family, as his earning capabilities were so financially beneficial for Tony that he actually looked past his idiotic behavior because of how good of an earner he was. And because of this, Paulie becomes jealous like he always does when someone out-earns Paulie, and because of this, Paulie wants to have Ralph killed. Ralph was an immense earner for one reason, and that is because he is the head of the Esplanade construction project. However, to Tony and John Sacrimoni's interest, it appeared Ralph was skimming not only his boss, but also the boss of New York in John Sacrimoni, and that Ralph was pocketing the rest of the estimated $3 million earned from the Esplanade. After all, Ralph was more creative than Spielberg. But the incidents kept on coming with Ralph, as just when you thought it couldn't get any worse with Ralph, as season 3 was the season of Ralph, however, it certainly got worse when it came to Ralph, as in the 6th episode of season 3, University, was where it began to go downhill for Ralph. While having an off and on relationship with Bada Bing employee Tracy, Ralph takes advantage of the naive Tracy throughout this episode. But it's when Tracy makes a comment towards Ralph and then proceeds to strike Ralph in the face is where things really escalate, as Ralph then responds by ultimately beating Tracy to death outside the Bing. This of course seriously upsets Tony, as he looked at Tracy the same way he would view his daughter Meadow, as an innocent young girl who had her entire life ahead of her. And to make matters worse, it was discovered Tracy was actually pregnant with Ralph's kid. Because of this, there is an ongoing beef between Tony and Ralph. And when Ralph turns down a drink from Tony, we get this Western standoff scene, which only adds to the tension. And when Gigi unexpectedly passes away, Tony is forced to play Ralph's hand by ultimately giving him captain, as this is what Ralph always wanted all along. Ralph was very much like Richie Aprile in many ways. Certainly the way the two characters behaved, how they acted in spite of Tony, and how the two acted freely without approval from Tony. Ralph too also dabbled into dating Tony's sister in Janice, just like Richie did, as Ralph thought by dating Janice that this would only get him closer to Tony, as this was the same mindset that Richie Aprile had when he too dated Janice as well. However, this only separated Ralph further from Tony, and as a result of this, Ralph is now the leader of the Aprile crew. With Ralph being the leader of the Aprile crew, he then decides to date Rosalie Aprile, and it is during this time where Ralph is viewed as a father figure in the eyes of Jackie Jr., albeit a horrible one, as Ralph decides to take Jackie Jr. along with him on scores and uses him to roughen up some individuals, as Ralph basically takes Jackie Jr. under his wing. He does this despite Tony preaching to everyone, including Ralph, to keep Jackie Jr. away from the mafia lifestyle. And like we always saw, Ralph doesn't listen, as he then gives Jackie Jr. his first gun, provides him with ecstasy to sell to Tony's daughter of all people, and gives him inspiration to rob Eugene Pontecorvo's card game. This sadly ended up costing Jackie Jr. his life, where Tony forces Ralph in a sit-down to basically admit this was all his own doing and fault, and that Ralph was basically a bad inspiration towards Jackie Jr., as Jackie Jr. was later killed by his very own cousin for taking a shot at made men, as Ralph reluctantly felt guilt on this situation, and rightfully so, as he was the one who basically ordered the hit on Jackie Aprile Jr. Later on, at a dinner party for Albert, Ralph decides to make a joke about Ginny Sacramone's weight. While John is not at the dinner, he eventually finds out because of his close relationship with Polly, and with there already being added tension between Polly and Ralph, things only get worse between the two when Ralph discovers that it was Polly who told John the infamous joke. As a result, he decides to prank phone call Polly's mother. This of course only added to the hatred that Polly felt towards Ralph, as Polly wanted Ralph whacked once and for all, but Tony wouldn't let Polly do that. But the final straw for Ralph was when there was a suspicious fire at Pyomai's stable just a few days after Ralph's son Justin was badly injured in a bow and arrow accident and needed to be hospitalized. And when Tony unexpectedly pays Ralph a surprise visit to confront Ralph about the mysterious fire, he blatantly denies setting a flame to the stable, but his actions otherwise point the finger directly at Ralph, as Tony discovers that Ralph killed Pyomai to collect the insurance money for his son's hospital bills. And with Tony having such a strong attachment towards animals already, he willingly kills Ralph, as he smashes his head against the floor, marking the end of Ralph's problematic tenure as a mobster. When it came to Ralph Cifaretto, he was very much like a majority of the mobsters that we see throughout the series. Guys like Tony Soprano, Richie Aprile, Christopher Moltisanti, and Phil Leotardo, as all were a ticking time bomb just waiting to explode. With guys like Richie, Christopher, and Ralph, they all couldn't keep their emotions in check, and it costed them their lives. For Ralph specifically, while he differed from Richie Aprile in terms of likeness, with Ralph being an immense earner for the family, which kept everyone happy except for Polly, he never seemed to learn from his mistakes. It was exhausting for Tony and others watching Ralph never mature as time went on and never learn from his mistakes. Between the weight joke about Ginny Sacramone, skimming out Tony and John when it came to the Esplanade construction project, dating Tony's sister in Janice, being a bad influence towards Jackie Jr., prank phone calling Polly's mother as payback for Polly telling the joke to John, killing Tracy and her unborn baby, disrespecting the Bing, and finally killing Tony's beloved horse in Pyomai. It seemed it was one thing after another for Ralph, and Tony had ultimately had enough. And by the end, he was using just about any excuse that he could as the final straw to finally get rid of Ralph. What are your thoughts about the legendary character of Ralph Cifaretto? I would love to hear them down in the comment section below. And be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, links will be in the description. For more Sopranos content, keep it locked here, right here on this channel.